Montana had always bred its share of quiet men, but Nathan Cooper was different. For 15 years he'd worked his ranch in Eagle Valley, and near perfect silence, known only as the weathered old rancher who kept to himself. The locals had grown used to his presence at Sarah's diner, every Sunday drinking black coffee and reading his paper, never noticing how his careful eyes always found exits and vantage points. No one knew about the twin Colts he kept cleaned and oiled in his ranch house, or why he'd chosen this particular piece of land with its perfect view of the valley's main approach. That all changed the day the Ghost Warriors MC thundered into Eagle Valley, their chrome-plated Harleys shattering the morning peace. They couldn't have known that the quiet rancher watching from the diner window had been waiting for them had chosen this valley precisely because men like them would eventually come. They were about to learn what others had discovered too late, that sometimes the deadliest predator is the one you never hear coming. Let's take a quick break. Tell us, where are you tuning in from? If this kind of content speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special. Sarah Williams wiped down the counter of her diner, watching Cooper through the morning light. 15 years of serving him breakfast, and she still couldn't quite figure him out. The bell above the door chimed as Sheriff David Carter entered, removing his hat and nodding to the regulars. Morning, Sarah. Cooper giving you any trouble? Carter's eyes crinkled with humor, still waiting on him to say more than 3 words together. Sarah replied, pouring the sheriff's usual coffee. Cooper's newspaper rustled as he turned a page, seemingly oblivious to their conversation, but Sarah had noticed how his shoulders tensed slightly at the sound of approaching motorcycles. The rumble grew louder, and conversations in the diner died as 5 Harley pulled into the lot. Their riders wore leather cuts and blahs with a skull wearing a crown. The Ghost Warriors MCs. Colors trouble? Sarah asked quietly. Carter shook his head. Not yet, just passing through, they said. Asked about local businesses, room rates at the motel. They've been asking about more than that. Dr. Bennett spoke up from his booth. Been in my clinic twice already, wanting to know about pharmaceutical deliveries. Cooper folded his paper with deliberate care, laying a 5 bill beneath his coffee cup as he stood. One of the bikers entered the diner, the patches on his cut identifying him as Michael Viper Sterling. Sterling's eyes swept the room, settling on Cooper with the instinctive recognition of one predator sensing another. Cooper moved toward the door with unhurried steps. Excuse me, old-timer, Sterling called out, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Couldn't help but notice that nice piece of land you got up on the ridge. Cooper paused, his back to Sterling. The diner had gone completely silent. Been thinking about maybe setting up a chapter house in the valley. Sterling continued, your place would be perfect. Might be interested in making you an offer. Cooper turned slightly, just enough to meet Sterling's gaze. When he spoke, his voice was soft as falling snow. Not for sale. He started to move again, but Sterling stepped into his path. Maybe you should think about it. Prices of cattle being what they are might be your best option. Sarah washed Cooper's hands. They hadn't moved toward any weapon, but something in their stillness made her breath catch. Best option, Cooper repeated quietly, would be for you to step aside. Sterling's hand twitched toward his jacket, but Cooper was already moving. No one saw exactly what happened next. Sterling simply found himself staring at the ceiling, his arm twisted at an angle that made him gasp. Cooper released him and walked out, leaving Sterling on the floor and the diner in stunned silence. Through the window they watched him mount his horse and ride away, his movements as calm as if nothing had happened. Jesus, Deputy Turner whispered from beside Carter. What was that? Carter studied Cooper's retreating figure. That sun was our first glimpse of something interesting outside. The other Ghost Warriors helped Sterling to his feet. Their faces were hard with anger and wounded pride, but there was something else in their eyes now, uncertainty, fear. Back at his ranch that evening, Cooper stood on his porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. He could see the lights of Eagle Valley below, peaceful for now. His phone buzzed, an old flip phone. Deliberately basic, the text was simple. They're here. Cooper deleted the message and went inside. In his study, he opened a hidden panel behind his desk, revealing a wall of surveillance photos, maps, and documents. The Ghost Warriors featured prominently their routes, their contacts, their operations across 3 states. He'd spent 15 years building this cover, choosing this valley, waiting for them to expand their territory this far north. Now they were finally here, and Nathan, Silent Storm Cooper, was about to remind them why some legends are best left undisturbed in town. Sterling nursed his bruised ego and arm at the local bar, speaking into his phone. Boss, yeah, we might have a situation here. That rancher you asked about, he's different, might need to handle this carefully. The voice of Dominic the Demon Romano crackled through the phone. Different how? Like someone who's seen serious action, military maybe, or law enforcement. The way he moved. Interesting, Romano replied. Keep watching him, but don't make any moves yet. I'm coming out there myself. Some old-timer with a few tricks won't stop what's coming. Sterling hung up, unaware that his conversation had been observed. Emma Richardson, closing up her general store across the street, had seen everything. She made her way to Sarah's diner, where several townspeople had gathered. They're calling in their leader. Emma reported something about Cooper spooked them. Sarah looked around the table at the concerned face. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Way they'd been pushing into town, asking questions, making threats. Question is Bennett interjected. What happens when they push back? And what's Cooper's part in all this? Sheriff Carter stood adjusting his gun belt. Guess we're about to find out, but I get the feeling our quiet rancher might be exactly what this town needs right now. As night fell over Eagle Valley, the pieces were being set for a conflict that would shake the entire region. Cooper cleaned his guns with practiced deficiency while in a motel room 30 meters away. Dominic Romano studied satellite images of the valley, planning his next move. The calm before the storm was about to break, and when it did, secrets long buried would finally come to light. The morning brought a convoy of black SUVs and motorcycles rolling into Eagle Valley, their arrival marking the end of whatever peace the town had known. Dominic the Demon Romano sat in the lead vehicle, his scarred face studying the landscape with calculating eyes. The ghost warriors' patches glinted in the morning sun as they formed an escort around their leader's vehicle at the general store. Emma Richardson watched the procession through her front window. Mary, she called to her assistant, get on the phone tree. Everyone needs to know they're here. The convoy didn't stop until it reached Sarah's diner. Romano emerged from his SUV with the fluid grace of a predator, his leather cut pristine, his silver hair slicked back. Michael Sterling hurried to his side, speaking in low tones and gesturing toward Cooper's ranch visible on the distant ridge. Inside the diner, Sarah kept her face neutral as Romano approached the counter. Coffee black, he said, his voice carrying the rough edge of authority. And a word with the owner. You're talking to her, Sarah replied, pouring his coffee without meeting his eyes. Beautiful place you have here. Romano smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Shame if anything happened to it before Sarah could respond. The bell above the door chimed. Nathan Cooper walked in, his boots quiet on the wooden floor. The diner fell silent as he made his way to his usual booth, seemingly oblivious to Romano's presence. Mr. Cooper, Romano called out, turning to face him. I've heard interesting things about you. Cooper sat down, unfolding his newspaper with deliberate care. Not much to hear. Romano approached Cooper's booth, coffee in hand, without invitation. He slid into the seat opposite. See, that's where you're wrong. Man buys a strategic piece of property, lives alone for 15 years, handles himself the way you handled my lieutenant. That's a story worth hearing. Cooper looked up from his paper, meeting Romano's gaze for a long moment. Neither man spoke. The tension in the diner grew thick enough to cut. Your cough is getting cold, Cooper finally said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner. Romano's smile turned predatory. You know, I did some checking after Sterling's incident. Interesting thing about records, sometimes what's missing tells you more than what's there. Your history before Eagle Valley, it's awful thin. Like me to fatten it up for you? That won't be necessary. See, I'm a businessman. I have plans for this valley, plans that could benefit everyone. All I need is cooperation. Romano leaned forward. Your land is perfect for what we need. Name your price. Cooper folded his paper carefully. Already did not for sale. Everything's for sale. Romano's voice hardened. Question is whether the seller walks away happy or not at all. Cooper stood, dropping his usual $5 on the table as he passed Romano. He paused. You've got it backward, he said quietly. Question is whether the buyer learns to walk away or doesn't walk away at all. The threat hung in the air as Cooper left Romano's face darkened with rage, but there was something else in his expression recognition. He'd seen something in Cooper's eyes that worried him outside. Sheriff Carter was waiting by his patrol car, quite a show of horse, he said as Cooper passed. Going to get worse, Cooper replied, mounting his horse. Maybe it's time you told me what's really going on here. Cooper studied the sheriff for a moment. Best you don't know yet, but keep your deputy close. Storm's coming back inside. Romano was already on his phone. Run everything again, military records, law enforcement, federal databases. I want to know who we're dealing with at the general store. Emma Richardson was having her own revelation. She'd lived in Eagle Valley for 40 years, kept records of every major transaction. Something about Cooper's land purchase had always bothered her as she pulled out the old deed records, studying them with fresh eyes. Mary, she called, bring me the maps from the county surveyor's office, the old ones. As morning turned to afternoon, the ghost warriors began establishing their presence. Pairs of bikers patrolled the streets, memorizing layouts, noting security camera positions. They paid particular attention to the police station, the bank, and the roads leading to Cooper's ranch. Bennett, watching from his clinic window, made a call to an old friend in the FBI. The call went straight to voicemail. Jim, it's Michael Bennett. Remember that favor you owe me? Time to pay up. Need everything you can find on it. Dominic Romano and the Ghost Warriors MC. And while you're at it, look into Nathan Cooper. Something's not adding up at his ranch. Cooper watched the valley through binoculars. Romano's men were professional. He had to give them that. They were establishing a perimeter, setting up observation posts disguised as camping spots, but they hadn't found his cameras yet, the ones he'd spent 15 years placing at strategic points throughout the valley. His secure laptop showed feeds from these hidden cameras, recording faces, license plates, conversations. 15 years of patience was about to pay off. The Ghost Warriors thought they were setting a trap, never realizing they were walking into one that had been waiting for them since before they even knew this valley existed in town. Sarah closed her diner early, something she hadn't done in 20 years. As she locked up, she noticed Emma Richardson hurrying toward her, clutching old documents. Sarah, Emma called out, breathless, you need to see this. The property records, the surveys. Cooper didn't just buy that land, he chose it. Every acre, specific lie place to overlook every major route through the valley, like someone planning for a siege. Sarah murmured, or someone setting a trap. Emma added, night fell over Eagle Valley, but few slept. Romano's men established themselves in the motel, their bikes lined up like soldiers at attention. In his room, Romano studied satellite images of Cooper's ranch, marking potential approaches, weaknesses. Boss Sterling reported, our contact in the FBI came through. You're not going to believe what we found. Romano read the file, his face growing increasingly grave. Get everyone together, he ordered. Now at the ranch, Cooper sat in darkness, cleaning his guns. The phone buzzed with another text. Files accessed. They know Cooper deleted the message. A ghost of it smile touching his lips. The pieces were falling into place exactly as he planned. Tomorrow would bring violence. There was no avoiding that now, but violence had been his teacher for longer than these men knew, and he'd learned its lessons while telling and preparing this story. Took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the sheriff's office, Carter received his own revelation via fax. The documents made him sit back, whistling softly. Son of a gun, he muttered, staring at Cooper's true identity. This whole time the stage was set. Dawn would bring a reckoning. 15 years in the making, and Eagle Valley was about to learn why some quiet men are best left undisturbed. Sheriff Carter sat at his desk, staring at the fact papers scattered before him, the pieces finally falling into place. Nathan Cooper wasn't just any former lawman. He was U.S. Marshal Nathan Silent Storm Cooper, the man who had dismantled the largest drug trafficking operation in the Pacific Northwest 15 years ago. The operation had cost him everything: his family, his career, and nearly his life. The morning stillness shattered as motorcycles roared past the sheriff's office. Carter looked up to see ghost warriors positioning themselves at strategic points throughout town. Their message was clear: the town was being locked down. The radio crackled, "Sheriff, we've got trouble at the bank." Deputy Turner's voice was tense. 4 of Romano's men just went in Armed on my way, Carter grabbed his jacket, then paused. He picked up his phone and dialed Cooper's number. Already know Cooper's quiet voice answered on the first ring. Been watching, don't engage yet, don't engage. They're taking over my town. They think they are. Watch the bank's west side. Carter moved to his window as Romano's men emerged from the bank with the manager. A familiar figure on horseback appeared at the corner. Cooper sat motionless, his mere presence causing the bikers to freeze. That's far enough. Cooper's voice carried clearly across the morning air. This doesn't concern you, old man, one of the bikers growled, but his hand trembled on his weapon. Let him go, Cooper said softly, or I start reminding you why they called me Silent Storm. The bank manager's eyes widened. Even the bikers reacted to the name. Cooper's reputation from his martial days still carried weight in certain circles. Romano emerged from his SUV, clapping slowly. Now it makes sense, the legendary Silent Storm hiding out as a rancher. I thought you died in that Seattle raid. A lot of people thought that. Cooper replied, same people thought you'd never rebuild after I took down your operation in 08. The revelation hit the gathering crowd like a thunderbolt. Romano's face twisted with recognition and rage. You're the one who killed my brother. Your brother killed himself when he chose to use kids as drug mules. I just delivered the consequence. The tension in the street could have been cut with a knife. Romano's men had their hands on their weapons, but none dared draw. They'd all heard stories of Cooper's speed, how he'd earned his nickname by appearing silently out of nowhere, taking down entire crews before they knew what hit them. Times change. Marshal Romano spat the title like poison. You're not dealing with street thugs anymore. I've got 30 men in this town, more coming your one man. Cooper's smile was cold as mountain frost. You've got 30 men in my killbox. Been setting this up since before you knew this valley existed. As if on cue, red dots appeared on the chests of Romano's men, laser sights from hidden positions. Cooper had spent years preparing, placing cameras and weapons caches throughout the town. Jesus, Deputy Turner whispered to Carter. He turned the whole valley into a trap. Let the manager go, Cooper repeated. Then we talk about how this ends. Romano's men looked to their leader, sweat visible on their faces. Despite the cool morning, the bank manager was released, scurrying to safety. This isn't over, Romano snarled, but he was already backing toward his vehicle. You've got no idea what's coming. Oh, but I do, Cooper replied. Been watching your operation grow. The drug routes through Canada, the gun running, the human trafficking. Got it all documented, just waiting for you to walk into my web. Romano's face went pale. 15 years of building his empire, and Cooper had been watching, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the ghost warriors retreated, Sarah emerged from her diner. All this time, she said, approaching Cooper, you've been protecting us. Town needed someone watching, Cooper replied simply. Seemed like a good place to set a trap. Sheriff Carter joined them, shaking his head in amazement. The ranch purchase, the strategic position, the quiet routine, it was all part of your plan. Best ambush is the one they walk into willingly. Cooper dismounted. Romano's been looking to expand north for years, knew he'd eventually try to set up here. Valleys perfect for his operation, remote, multiple escape routes, good cover for movement. So you've just been waiting, Carter asked. Gathering evidence, building cases, setting up surveillance network of cameras, covers every inch of this valley. Got enough to put him away for life once he makes his big move. And when will that be? Cooper's eyes tracked Romano's retreating SUV. Tonight. He's too proud to run, too smart to wait. He'll hit hard, try to overwhelm us with numbers. As Carter raised an eyebrow. Your town sheriff, your call. Carter looked around at the faces of his townspeople, scared but determined. They just learned their quiet rancher was actually a legend of law enforcement, a man who'd sacrificed everything to bring down criminals like Romano. Carter smiled grimly. Suppose we ought to get ready then. The next few hours transformed Eagle Valley. Under Cooper's guidance, defensive positions were established. Emma Richardson's store became a command center, its back room filled with surveillance monitors showing feeds from Cooper's hidden cameras. Bennett prepared his clinic for casualties, while Sarah's diner became a staging area at his ranch. Cooper opened a hidden bunker beneath his barn, revealing an arsenal of legal weapons and tactical gear. Been Collecting evidence for 15 years, he told Carter as they surveyed the equipment, waiting for Romano to get overconfident. To bring his whole operation into one place, why not just arrest him earlier? Needed him to commit everything, bring in all his resources, only way to ensure we get the entire organization. Cooper checked his rifles methodically. Tonight, he'll try to make an example of this town. Instead, he'll give us everything we need to tear his empire down. As sunset approached, more ghost warriors arrived, bringing their numbers to nearly 50. Romano had called in every available member, determined to crush any resistance. What he didn't know was that Cooper had planned for exactly this. Every arrival was photographed. Every license plate logged, every face added to the evidence that would eventually bury the entire organization. The storm was about to break over Eagle Valley, but for the first time in 15 years, Nathan silent storm. Cooper allowed himself a small smile. The trap was set, and the ghosts of his past were about to learn why some legends never die. Darkness fell over Eagle Valley like a heavy blanket, broken only by strategic pools of light from carefully positioned street lamps. Cooper stood in Emma's store studying the surveillance feeds, while Romano's men took up positions around the town's perimeter. They're splitting into 4 groups, Cooper noted, his voice barely above a whisper. Just like I expected. Sheriff Carter checked his weapon. How do you know they'd do that? Because it's what I do. Romano was military before he went outlaw. Standard tactical approach. Cooper pointed to different screens. Main force will hit from the east, trying to drive us west into their smaller teams. Through the monitors, they watched ghost warriors moving into position. Romano had indeed split his forces, 20 men in the main group, 10 each in the flanking positions. Their movements were coordinated. Professional now, Deputy Turner asked, fingered tense on his rifle trigger. Not yet, Cooper replied. Let them commit fully to the approach. Sarah's voice crackled over their radios. Got 8 of them moving past the diner, armed with automatic weapons. Remember, Cooper instructed, no one engages unless directly threatened. Let them think they got us pinned down. Romano's voice boomed through a megaphone. Cooper, last chance to surrender. You're outnumbered and surrounded. Cooper picked up his radio. Funny, I was about to say the same to you. The attack began with a surge of motorcycles and SUVs rushing into town from multiple directions. Gunfire erupted as Romano's men shot out streetlights, trying to create confusion. They didn't realize every broken light was forcing them exactly where Cooper wanted them. They're in position, Cooper announced. Sheriff, your call. Carter nodded grimly. Light him up. Suddenly, powerful floodlights blazed from concealed positions, catching the ghost warriors in harsh crossfire of illumination simultaneously. Police sirens wailed from multiple directions, not just Carter's deputies, but state police. Cooper had quietly positioned in the surrounding hills. What the hell? Sterling's voice crackled over the ghost warriors' radio frequency, which Cooper had been monitoring for weeks. Boss, we've got movement on all sides. Romano's main force found themselves caught in the open, channeled by Cooper's strategically parked vehicles into a kill zone. When the first shots came, they were precise and coordinated. Cooper's planning had turned the town's defenders into an efficient fighting force. Groups of 3. Cooper's voice was calm on the radio. Just like we practiced. Controlled fire. Conserve ammunition. The ghost warriors' initial assault faltered as they realized their superior numbers meant nothing. Every route they tried had been blocked or trapped. Every position of cover they sought had already been ranged and targeted. Boss, Sterling's panic was evident. They're picking us apart. Romano, watching from his command position, finally understood. It's a tactical funnel, he growled. Every street, every alley. He's been designing this battlefield for years. Cooper moved through the shadows like a ghost, his rifle cracking with lethal precision. Each shot was carefully placed, wounding rather than killing, disabling rather than destroying. He wasn't just fighting, he was building a case, creating witnesses who would later testify. Federal agents. A new voice thundered through the night. This is the FBI. You are surrounded. Romano's face went pale as helicopters appeared overhead, their spotlights pinning down his remaining forces. Cooper's trap hadn't just been about the town. He coordinated with multiple agencies, timing everything perfectly. Pull back, Romano ordered. Everyone pull back, but retreat was no longer an option. Cooper had anticipated every escape route. State police blocked the highways. FBI tactical teams had quietly surrounded the area. Even the backcountry roads were covered by local deputies. Cooper had spent years training. 15 years, Cooper's voice came across their radio. Frequency 15 years, watching you build your empire, watching you get careless. Confident, waiting for you to put all your resources in one place, Sarah watched from her diner window as ghost warriors began surrendering in groups, the sight of hardened bikers dropping their weapons. Hands raised was almost surreal. Clear, the south side. Carter reported 7 in custody, east side clear. Another voice confirmed 5 more detained. Cooper's voice remained steady. Remember, secure and document everything, every weapon, every vehicle, every phone. It's all evidence. Romano, his position rapidly deteriorating, made one last desperate move. He and his core team charged toward Cooper's ranch, thinking to either escape through the back country or take a final revenge. He's heading for the ranch, Turner reported urgently. Good. Cooper's smile was cold. That's where the main evidence is stored. Let him go right where we want him. The ranch, dark and seemingly deserted, beckoned Romano's group like a sanctuary. They didn't realize they were charging straight into the heart of Cooper's trap, where the most damning evidence of their organization's crimes had been carefully assembled. From her vantage point, Emma watched the operation unfold with growing amazement. All these years, she whispered to Sarah, we thought he was just a quiet rancher, but he was building this piece by piece, not building. Cooper's voice surprised them as he emerged from the shadows. Preparing justice doesn't always come quick. Sometimes it needs time to ripen. The night was far from over. Romano and his core team were cornered, but dangerous yet. As Cooper mounted his horse to confront them at the ranch, his expression wasn't of a man heading into danger, but of a hunter whose trap had finally sprung perfectly. The ghost warriors were about to learn why Cooper's old nickname wasn't just about his still approach. It was about the unstoppable force that followed the quiet. Romano and his remaining men crashed through Cooper's ranch gate, their motorcycles' headlights cutting through the darkness. The main house stood silent, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky behind them. Sirens wailed in the distance. Spread out, Romano ordered, his voice tight with rage. Turn this place upside down. Find anything we can use against him. Sterling, nursing a bullet graze on his arm, tried to reason with his boss. We should run while we can. Cooper got federal backup. Cooper got evidence. Romano snapped. 15 years of surveillance. We find it, destroy it. There's still a chance to salvage something. They breached the house, finding it empty, but meticulously organized. No photos on the walls, no personal touches. It was a place designed for function, not comfort. Check the basement, Romano commanded, but as his men moved toward the door, floodlights suddenly blazed to life outside, turning night into day. Interesting thing about evidence, Cooper's voice carried clearly from somewhere in the darkness. Best kind isn't papers or photographs. Best kind is testimony, living witnesses. Romano spun, firing blindly toward the voice. His bullets thudded into wooden walls as Cooper's words seemed to come from everywhere at once. Your operation's already done, Cooper continued. FBI raiding your warehouses in 3 states. D's moving on your drug routes. F's hitting your weapons catches. All coordinated, all happening right now. How? Romano's voice cracked. How could you know everything? Because I was you once. Cooper's tone shifted, carrying old pain. Undercover marshal deep in a cartel. Learned how organizations like yours think, how they move. Then they found out who I was. Killed my family while I watched. Couldn't get there in time. The revelation hung in the air now. Romano remembered the legendary operation that had brought down the Sioux cartel, started by a marshal who'd lost everything after that. Cooper emerged from the shadows, his rifle trained steadily on Romano. I learned patience. Watch your organization rise from the Sioux cartel's ashes. Tracked every move, every connection. Built this place specifically to trap you. Sterling and the others were already surrendering, dropping their weapons as federal agents swarmed the property. But Romano wasn't finished. Should have stayed dead. Marshal, he snarled, raising his gun with lightning speed. Cooper was faster. His first shot took Romano's gun hand, the second his shoulder. The crime boss crashed to the floor, his last attempt at violence failing. Like everything else this night, found something. An agent called from the barn. Hidden elevator leads to some kind of command center. Sheriff Carter arrived As they were bringing up the first boxes of evidence, the underground facility was a testament to Cooper's patience. Walls covered with photos, documents, maps, 15 years of surveillance, all meticulously organized, started building this place. The day I bought the ranch, Cooper explained, leading them through the facility. Knew someone would try to use this valley, eventually perfect corridor for drug running, human trafficking. Just had to wait for the right organization to take the bait. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance photos showed ghost warriors' operations across multiple states. Financial records traced money laundering through seemingly legitimate businesses, names, dates, locations. Everything needed to dismantle not just Romano's chapter, but the entire organization. Those cameras you planted around town. Carter shook his head in amazement. They were just the final piece, weren't they? Needed to document everything. Cooper nodded. Build an airtight case, not just against the ghost warriors, but against every corrupt official who helped them, every business that laundered their money. Sarah appeared at the barn entrance carrying coffee and food for the law enforcement teams. Her eyes widened at the sight of the command center. All these years, she said softly, having breakfast at my diner, reading your paper. Best cover is simple one, Cooper replied, quiet rancher keeping to himself. Nobody looks too hard at a man like that. FBI agents were already processing the scene, cataloging evidence, securing prisoners. Romano sat handcuffed, watching his empire crumble in real time as reports came in of simultaneous raids across the country. Your old task force has been waiting for this, an FBI commander told Cooper. They'll be handling the prosecution with this evidence we're looking at. RICO charges that'll put them away for life. Deputy Turner, helping to process prisoners, overheard Romano talking to himself. 15 years. He spent 15 years setting this up. Who does that? Someone who understands that true justice takes time, Cooper answered, passing by someone who learned the hard way that rushing in gets people killed. As dawn approached, the full scope of the operation became clear. The Ghost Warriors' entire command structure was in custody. Their assets were frozen, their properties seized, their corruption exposed. Emma arrived with fresh coffee, having opened her store early to support the law enforcement teams. Town won't be the same after this, she observed. No, Cooper agreed. It'll be better, safer. What about you? Carter asked. Operations over. Will you stay? Cooper looked out over the valley, now bustling with federal vehicles and evidence teams. For 15 years he'd lived for this moment, driven by the ghosts of his past and the promise of justice. Ranch needs tending, he said finally. Town needs watching. Besides, a ghost of it smile touched his lips. Someone needs to keep an eye out for the next bunch that thinks this valley is ripe for taking. The sun rose over Eagle Valley, illuminating a changed landscape. The Ghost Warriors were finished. Their threat ended not by violence alone, but by the patience of a man who'd learned to play the long game. But as Cooper watched the activity around his ranch, he knew this wasn't really the end. Somewhere out there, other organizations would hear about what happened. Some would be smart enough to stay away, others would see it as a challenge, and that was fine with Cooper. He had time, he had patience, and he had a town worth protecting, not just from the Ghost Warriors, but from whatever came next. The quiet rancher would keep his watch ready for the next storm on the horizon. The morning after the raid, Eagle Valley felt like a town waking from a long dream. FBI evidence teams worked methodically through Cooper's underground command center, while state police processed the long line of arrested Ghost Warriors. News helicopters circled overhead, kept at a distance by temporary flight restrictions. Sarah's diner had become an unofficial command post, serving coffee and meals to law enforcement personnel. Cooper sat in his usual booth, but now everyone knew to give him space. The weight of his exposed identity hung heavy in the air. Channel 7 wants an interview, Sheriff Carter said, sliding into the booth opposite Cooper. So do half the national news networks. Not interested, Cooper replied, studying his coffee. Might not have a choice. Stories too big to ignore. Ghost Warriors had tentacles in state government, law enforcement, even judges. Cooper nodded slowly. That was the real target, not just Romano's crew, but everyone they've corrupted. Found evidence of 3 state senators taking bribes, dozens of cops on Their payroll. Emma approached their booth, newspaper in hand. The headline screamed, "Undercover Marshal's 15-year sting operation exposes massive criminal empire." "You're famous," she said, sliding the paper onto their table. "Makes the job harder," Cooper replied. "Best work gets done in shadows." Deputy Turner rushed in, looking concerned. "Sheriff, we've got reporters trying to get up to Cooper's ranch, and there's more FBI. Just found something big in the evidence. They need you both." At the ranch, the underground command center was bustling with federal agents. The FBI Commander Johnson met them at the entrance. "Your surveillance didn't just catch ghost warriors," Johnson explained, leading them to a computer station. "We got evidence of meetings between Romano and members of the Shadow Ravens, MC Dark Riders, even some Mexican cartel representatives." Cooper studied the footage. They were planning to turn Eagle Valley into a major hub distribution center for the whole Northwest. That's not all. Johnson brought up financial records. Money trails lead to offshore accounts, shell companies. "This goes higher than we thought. Someone in the governor's office is involved." Sarah appeared at the entrance, escorted by an agent. "Thought you all could use some fresh coffee. And Cooper, you should know to filling up with strangers, not just reporters." "What kind of strangers?" Carter asked. "The kind that sit too straight, watch too carefully, military bearing, trying to look casual." Cooper's expression darkened. "Other organizations sending observers, wanting to see what happened to Romano in town." The changes were obvious. Local police had set up checkpoints with state trooper support. FBI agents conducted interviews with townspeople, building their case, but more subtle changes were happening too. Dr. Bennett treated a handcuffed ghost warrior's wounds while federal agents waited. "You know," the biker said quietly, "we thought this was just some quiet town, easy target. Never figured we were walking into a trap. Years in the making." "That's what happens," Bennett replied, "when you underestimate quiet men." At the general store, Emma dealt with a surge of customers, law enforcement, media, and cure. As outsiders, she noticed unfamiliar faces studying the town's layout, taking pictures, making notes. "They're already planning," Cooper said, appearing silently beside her. "Other organizations thinking they can succeed where Romano failed. Will they try something? Some will be smart, stay away. Others won't be able to resist the challenge. Territory is too valuable." Carter joined them, looking troubled. "Just got word. Romano lawyers already talking deals, offering names, dates, evidence of corruption going back decades." "Good." Cooper nodded. "That's why we kept them alive. Dead men can't testify." The day brought more revelations. As the FBI worked through Cooper's evidence, the Ghost Warriors operation had been larger than anyone imagined, touching every level of society. But Cooper had documented it all, building an airtight case that would take down not just criminals but their enablers in legitimate society. "Found something else," Johnson reported late that afternoon. "Communications between Romano and someone high up in federal law enforcement, someone who knew about the original operation against the Juarez cartel." Cooper's face hardened. "The one that got my family killed. Looks like the leak came from inside. Someone tipped them off about you being undercover." The revelation landed like a physical blow. After 15 years, Cooper was finally closing in on the truth about his family's murder. Sarah watched from her diner as more suspicious vehicles rolled into town. "They're like vultures," he observed to Emma, circling, waiting to see what's left. "They'll find more than they bargained for," Emma replied. "Town's different now. We're not just some quiet community anymore." As evening approached, Cooper stood on his porch watching. The Valley FBI teams had finally finished processing his command center. The evidence was headed to secure facilities ready to support prosecutions that would shake the foundations several states. Carter joined him, holding a fresh report. "Got something you need to see. That federal law enforcement connection Johnson found goes all the way to Washington. Someone very high up has been protecting these operations for years now. We know why," Cooper said quietly. "Question is, what will they do to keep it buried?" The sun set over Eagle Valley, but few slept that night. Too much had changed. Too many revelations had shaken their world. Cooper's 15-year operation had exposed not just a criminal empire, but a web of corruption that touched the highest levels of power in the darkness. New players were already moving pieces into position. The Ghost Warriors were finished, but they were just one head of the Hydra. Bigger battles loomed on the horizon, but Eagle Valley was ready. Cooper's patient planning hadn't just brought down criminals, it had transformed a quiet town into a fortress, its people prepared for whatever came. Next, the quiet rancher work wasn't finished. In many ways, it was just beginning. 3 days after the raid, Cooper sat in an FBI mobile command center, watching surveillance footage of a private jet landing at the state capitol. The passenger list included 3 federal judges and a deputy director from the Justice Department. Awful lot of firepower for a simple biker gang case, John observed, sharing Cooper's concern. Not here for the ghost warriors, Cooper replied quietly. They're here to contain the damage. Romano's been talking. Indeed, Romano had started revealing names the moment he realized the depth of evidence against him. His latest statement had sent shockwaves through federal law enforcement. Detailed accounts of monthly payments to officials, judges who'd buried evidence, agents who'd redirected investigations. Sheriff Carter entered carrying fresh intel. State police just got ordered to stand down from the investigation. Command came from the governor's office, directly, right on schedule. Cooper nodded. Powers moving to protect itself. Sarah's voice crackled over Carter's radio. Got 2 suits at the diner asking questions about Cooper. They're showing federal badges, but something feels off. Description, Cooper asked. Expensive suits, government haircuts, but their shoes are wrong. Real feds wear practical shoes for field work. Cooper was already moving. Hired guns, private contractors. They're trying to find pressure points. In town, the atmosphere had changed. Emma's general store now stocked extra ammunition and basic survival supplies. Dr. Bennett had expanded his clinic's emergency supplies. Even Father Thomas had opened the church basement for community defense meetings. Town's adapting, Carter noted as they drove toward the diner. Learning from you had to, Cooper replied. Once this broke open, knew it would draw attention. Had to make sure the community could handle it. At the diner, the 2 suits were gone, but they'd left an impression. Sarah handed Cooper a business card. They'd left said they represent interested parties wanted to discuss mutual benefits. Cooper studied the card shell. Company traced it during my investigation. It's a front for clinging cartel money through legitimate businesses. They're not even trying to hide anymore. Carter frowned. Devote need to systems rigged at too many levels. That's why Romano's testimony is so dangerous. He can prove it. Back at the ranch, Johnson had more news. Got a hit on one of the offshore accounts.